evening, everyone. I'm probably going to be saying more or less the same as what everybody else has been saying before me. But I'm coming at it from the perspective of speech and language therapy. So I'll just go through it. A question I get asked a lot is it better for my child with developmental language disorder to go to an English medium school? And I'll briefly talk a little bit about what the role of speech and language therapist is in assessing and diagnosing children with language impairment, and a little bit about research on best practice for children with speech and language therapy, bilingual children with speech and language disorders. So this is Joe. He's 6. He's going to a Gael school. He only speaks English at home, but his older siblings go to a Gael school. One of his parents speaks reasonable Irish, the other none at all. The teacher says he is struggling, and he's been referred to speech and language therapy by his learning support teacher. Okay, so this is a hypothetical joke. So I suppose in this context, sometimes being educated in a second language is seen as a choice, okay, because this child could go to an English medium school. Now, for lots of bilingual children in this country, being educated in a second language is not a choice for them. And I think it's because of this choice, well, the professionals sometimes think this is a choice. And that's why sometimes the question comes up, well, is it better for them to actually go to an English medium school? And so I suppose what will happen when they go to speech and language therapist, well, the first question they ask is, well, is this just a language difference, or is this a true language disorder? In other words, is this child just struggling because they're learning Irish as their second language, or do they actually have a true underlying language disorder? And I mean, there's some research out there that says it actually takes a child somewhere between 3 and 5 years. They need between 3 and 5 years of exposure to that second language before they perform like a native language speaker in that language. But actually, it depends on the context and how much of that, how much of their day is being, exposed to that second language. So it's very blunt. And also you have to remember there's a difference between kind of what Cummins calls basic interpersonal communication skills, so just that social skills, which can come quite, within 2 to 3 years, and the actual cognitive academic language that's needed for learning, and that can take sometimes between 5 and 7 years before the child is competent in that language. So what should happen is that the speech and language therapist should ask the parents a lot about the child's language exposure and their history. So how much of each language they're hearing and using each day, and how long has that been going on? And that can sometimes tell you, well, actually they're just not hearing enough of one language, and there's no problem here, or it can indicate actually there's been a problem for a long time, even in the child's first language. So that can help distinguish that difference disorder question. And then what should happen is they will have a speech language communication assessment. So it should start in the child's L1, and for Joe, his L1 is English, his first language is English, and so that's not a problem. We have lots of tests in English. And if they find that it's okay, there's no problem with his first language, then he does not have a language disorder, because he just hasn't had enough exposure to Irish, and that's why maybe they're worried about his Irish language. If his English language is not, his first language is not okay, then we need to test them in the other language. We need to find out about the other language. And that's kind of where the problem starts really in speech and language therapy, because we don't always have assessments in the other language. So what can we do? Well, there's a number of different instruments out there. There's parent report instruments, and they're quite good for children up to the age of 3, and I've been involved in developing one for Irish-English bilinguals, so they're there. We use something called language sampling, which is basically just get the child to talk in that language. Off you go, tell a story, whatever, and then we look at what they're actually able to say in the language. Some people talk about using adaptive scoring. So, for example, if a child can say madra and dog, then they're credited as knowing one concept. Okay, but actually there's problems with that scoring, because you're not crediting the fact that the child actually knows 2 words, not one. So it's better to actually say, 2 words. And then this issue of standardized testing, and there's a huge problem with reliance on standardized testing in bilinguals. I mean, in Wales they've done some when they've made their tests, they've made them for children who speak only Welsh at home, or both Welsh and English at home, or only English at home, and then tested them on their Welsh and their English, and come up with sort of a normative idea of what an 8-year-old in a certain year of school should be able to say in terms of vocabulary or understanding vocabulary. So that's one answer, but and that's something we are trying to develop for the Irish language as well. But I suppose there's still problems with that, because you need huge numbers of children, to establish these tests. And so something that we're moving towards now is dynamic assessment. And when we talk with teachers about this is what they do all the time. The child comes in, you test them, you kind of see what they can do then through your teaching, and then you decide whether they have a problem or not. And the problem with speech and language therapy is sometimes we have an hour, half an hour to assess, to meet the child, diagnose the child, and come up with a therapy plan. So we just don't always have the time, but actually it's really, really important, particularly with a bilingual child. And I would consider Joe in this context to be a bilingual child. So he should be tested, then we should try and find ways, okay, if I slow down, if I repeat, if I use visuals, if I use some signs, can he learn? And if that child can pick up the language through that way, then I wouldn't be so worried about them. But the child who can't and isn't responding to these learning techniques, then I would be much more worried about him. So the research says that somewhere between 5 and 7% of children, so about 2 in a class of 30, would have some speech and language difficulties. And basically that should be the same for bilingual children. It's about the same percentage. So raising a child bilingually doesn't increase that risk, but it doesn't decrease it either. And reverting to one language will not actually fix the problem. And we know from the research today, children with speech and language disorders can learn 2 languages, as can children with Down syndrome, ADHD, a hearing impairment, autism, etc. But it's important to remember that they will learn those 2 languages relatively slower, and perhaps not to the same level as their typically developing bilingual peers. They still will have a language impairment. But they won't be any different to monolingual children with language impairment, provided they're given similar opportunities. And this, being given these opportunities to speak these languages is really, really important. So the short answer is it better for my child with a language disorder to go to an English medium school? Well, no, is the answer. And we've heard today, I'm not going to go into it, but they do as well as children with developmental language disorder in their L1. So I would never really worry about a child's English language development, because, like we say, they have loads of opportunities to learn English, and the research shows they do as well in their English language. Also, if you take away their other language, you're losing all these cultural connections, family connections, interaction. We know this from research as well. But I will say that research is very limited in the Irish context, and every child is unique and has individual needs. And really, I suppose parents need to ask themselves, well, what's their own attitude and support towards bilingualism? What is the child's enthusiasm for attending immersion school, and what is the availability of special educational services within this Irish medium school? And they'll weigh up those factors to make their decision, but they absolutely shouldn't be told a blanket you have to come out, because everything just said. And so what might happen for Joe? Well, if he has a true language disorder, then he should have therapy in English and in Irish. The speech and language therapist should work with the school and the special education resources to find out what's happening at school. If the SLT speaks Irish, then she should take, or he should take, mostly she's, a bilingual approach to the intervention. But unfortunately, there aren't very many bilingual speech and language therapists out there. So what they may do is work on English and rely on parents and teachers to facilitate the Irish language development. Now, I will just mention the Official Languages Act, which provides statutory rights to get speech and language therapy through Irish, so mustn't forget about that. Because if we did raise that, maybe they'd employ more therapists to speak through Irish, but anyway, I'll move on from that. And also the therapist, there'll be goals for home language, which will be English, will be maybe different for school language, which will be Irish. And in terms of transfer, well, vocabulary items might transfer. A lot of words in English and Irish are the same, or similar, cardigan. the grammar is different, so the grammar will not transfer, and so the therapist will have to work specifically on grammar in both languages. Okay. So final note, I suppose bilingual children with language disorders need focused, extended and continuous support from educational professionals as well as the family, community in both languages to ensure their complete acquisition. So I think we really need to build the evidence base in Ireland, and there's really nice examples of good practice of children being educated in immersion education with special educational needs, and to put those out there, and how is it working for these children, because I think people are sometimes just fearful. And I always say I'm never really worried about their English, but what about their Irish language development? And this goes for children who don't have special educational needs, and what opportunities do they have to use Irish once they walk beyond the school gates? And it's only by enhancing that is their Irish language going to be enhanced as well. So we have to address those for these kids too. That's it.